So we can start this Conversazioni Linguistiche today. I'm going to present our guest today, who is Jorge Vega Vilanova. He is a researcher at the University of Hamburg, where he works on two projects, namely critic doubling across Romance and Judeo Spanish in Bulgaria, a contact language between archaism and innovation. Moreover, he teaches at the Institut für Romanistik at the Universität Frankfurt. He earned his PhD at the University of Hamburg in 2018 with a dissertation titled Catalan Participle Agreement on the interaction between syntactic features and language change under the supervision of Professor Dr. Susanne Fischer. His research focuses on the syntax of Romance languages with special interest in agreement phenomenon, case and pronominal syntax, typology, language change, and language contact. Among his publications are the monograph Past Participle Agreement, a study on the grammaticalization of formal features, the article On Psych Verbs and Optional Clitic Doubling in Catalan and Other Ibero-Romance languages in 2022, and together with Susanne Fischer and colleagues, Patterns and Interference in Language Contact, the case of Judeo Spanish in Bulgaria in 2024. Today, he joins us with a talk titled Acquisition and Change in Context Settings on the morphosyntactic instability of object construction in Bulgarian Judeo Spanish. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's an honor to be here. Yep, thank you. And yeah, so what I'm going to present today is a little bit what the third phase of our project in Lettere Judeo Spanish, which we had at the University of Hamburg, but not only at the University of Hamburg, but we have a big research group from three universities: Hamburg, Universität des Saarlandes, Saarbrücken, and Universität in Mainz. These three universities were chosen because we wanted to understand how this contact variety works from all perspectives, because Bulgarian Judeo Spanish is a minority language and many of the interests were lexicon. And there are lots of works about lexicon and about phonetics, but not really a whole grammar work about this. And that was the idea, that we could make a holistic description of the language at that point. And that's why we mixed some experts in phonology, so Vistra and Mitro for Bulgarian, and Christoph and Jonas for Spanish. So we have both languages, the analysis of both languages, and then we have some experts for Bulgarian morphosyntax, with Diana and Tanya. And Susanne and me were the experts for morphosyntax of Spanish. And from this mixing comes the idea to see what happens when these two languages come into contact. What are the features that are connected, which are not Spanish but Bulgarian, and how Bulgarian features come into Spanish or not, and why.
Okay, wait.
No.
Yeah, no, it is.
Now it should work. Okay. We analyzed a lot of phenomena, but in this talk, I will concentrate in these three: differential object marking, critic doubling, and critic climbing, because the research group in Hamburg, we dealt with critics for a very long time. And that's why object constructions are especially interesting. And it's also what you mentioned in my dissertation with past participle agreement. I connected this also with object constructions. And I think this is a field where you find lots of variation and where you have a mixing of features which is not really understood. And it happens a lot. And that's why we wanted to look at object constructions related to critics, especially the critics. Just a short definition of these three. Differential object marking is when you have some direct objects that have a different morphological marking than others. So you have two types of direct object, and that's very typical for Spanish. In 1A, you have Pedro vio a la niña, and this preposition-like element is obligatory because la niña is human, and it's probably because it's human and it's definite and specific. And Pedro vio la película, it would be ungrammatical. You don't need any mark, and that's what Boston called differential mark. It's not only Spanish. We find this in several languages, also in Turkish, for example. Clitic doubling is when you have a clitic pronoun like lo into A or le into B, and it's co-referring with another XP, another DP, full DP in the same clause. So Pedro lo vio a él, it's obligatory because él is a full pronoun, and then you need the clitic. And Pedro le da el libro a María. Le is doubling the indirect object in this case, and it's optional. So Pedro da el libro a María would be grammatical as well. And the distribution of these clitics are quite complex, and there is a very different variants within the Spanish-speaking countries. And that's also very interesting to see it.
So it's not possible to say Pedro lo vio.
Pedro lo vio is also possible.
Okay.
Yes.
Only that okay.
Yeah. It's about the clitic, the presence or the absence of the clitic. The full pronoun alone is not possible. The clitic is always possible alone. And then we have clitic climbing, and this is a restriction in the position of the clitics when you have some modal verbs or auxiliary verbs. It depends. So María te lo quiere dar. Te und lo, you and it, the direct and indirect objects. Okay, the other way around, I mean, belongs to dar, to give them, give it to you. But they stick together with the modal verb want. But in this case, we have optionality in modern Spanish. María te lo quiere dar before the final modal verb, or María quiere dártelo is within the infinitive verb. And these are the three phenomena we are looking at this talk. And we chose them because they are all somehow interconnected, but also because they have very different conditions. So clitic doubling and differential object marking are linked to the semantics and the information structure of the data object. So they need some interface, some coordination of information at different language modules. They are much more complex than, for example, clitic climbing, which only belongs to narrow syntax. It's not linked to semantics. We don't have any different readings. We cannot produce different readings depending on the position of the clitics within the clause. It's just optionality, and it's something which is just syntactic, which is the position where I have to move. Where do I have to move the clitics, and it's a fixed position or not. And that's a core grammatical phenomenon. So not an interface phenomenon belonging to narrow syntax. So we try to make a distinction between phenomena that require the coordination of several information and phenomena that do not require this coordination. And then we expect different outcomes when we come to contact-induced language change. Interface phenomena will be more unstable, and we are following in some way, we are making an analogous conclusion from Sorace's interface hypothesis. Sorace has nothing to do with language contact. It's more like if you have an L2, you will not learn this L2 fully at the end because you have residual optionality. And this residual optionality is located at the interfaces. So focus or topic markings or something like this, but not at the core syntactic. These will be fully learned, or they can be fully learned. But optional residual optionality in Sorace's terms are only in the interfaces. And that's why we think if residual optionality is there, then probably when we have bilingual not only by L2, but also in language contact, in language change, we expect to have this residual optionality, which can lead to some transfer phenomena, some semantic change. So we are looking at phenomena that are interfaces from this perspective, and we expect the variation there and not in the core grammatical phenomena, which just obey natural language change, things like economy of the derivation. Less movement is better than more movement, for example, grammaticalization, and all these kind of processes we already know. And that an additional feature we wanted to mix with within this picture was age of acquisition. And this will be clear maybe a little bit later when we look at the specific community of Bulgarian Judeo Spanish people. It's very different if one feature is learned earlier or later, or the construction is learned earlier or later. Somehow interconnected with interface or core syntax. The goals of the talk are then to suggest that in order to explain contact and language change, first, we need to differentiate between core grammar and interface grammar. And second, that we will look at the interaction of acquisition or learnability and change. And that's why we choose these two kinds of phenomena, clitic doubling and dom on the one side, on the other side, clitic climbing. And this is what I am going to do in the talk. First, I will present some basic data about Bulgarian Judeo Spanish to understand how, what are the speakers I am talking about. Then I will make a more, discuss a little bit more in detail the three phenomena. And first, in Old Spanish, that's the starting point. So it will be clear later. And in Bulgarian, it's the contact language. And then I will present data in Judeo Spanish data from two fieldwork periods, 2012 and 22-23. So we managed to get data on two generations, which was very positive to make a comparison about the change and to make the connection between acquisition and change, or acquisition, contact, and change, because we have done two biological generations, and it was really very positive and useful. And then I will present the results and discuss them very shortly with some unexpected features that we found. So the setting. If you never heard about this, then until 1492, we had a Jewish community in Spain, the Sephardic Jews. They were expulsed from the Iberian Peninsula by the Catholic kings at the time. So they had to leave, they had to convert or leave, and many of them left the country at that time. Probably those that were wealthy and had some the possibilities to take a ship and take things with a ship, and they have some job to have money. That's most of them went in the eastern direction, so they crossed the Mediterranean Sea and settled down in many countries where the Ottoman Empire was. And this has a very simple reason. The Ottoman Empire had freedom of religion. They could build some communities, paying taxes, lots of taxes probably, but yeah, in exchange of these taxes, they could maintain the traditions, the religion, their jobs. So they could also maintain the language. And they were more or less isolated in all these cities you can see here, from Zagreb, Belgrade, or Bucharest in the northern part, until to some North African cities. The most important communities were in Salonique, but also in the Turkish coast, at the Turkish coast, and of course, now Bulgaria. And Bulgaria has some very specific conditions. So the interesting thing about this is that settled down in countries that are multilingual per se. So they have many typological distinct languages from Turkish on the one side, and everybody has more or less contact with Turkish at some point, not at the beginning maybe, but you have Greek, you have Albanian, and you have Slavic languages, Serbo-Croatian and Bulgarian, and you have also a Romance language with Romanian. So you have more or less everything, and that's a very interesting thing, because in these first 300 or 400 years of in the Eastern diaspora, when they are under the Ottoman Empire, they don't show much language contact phenomena. They are really very isolated, and after 100 or 200 years through the trading routes they had, they built a little bit like a coinage. So some features spread around all the communities, and everybody from Bucharest to the cities in Turkey, as Izmir or Bursa, have some features that are only innovations of Judeo-Spanish. That's very special. This nivellation at that time. In the 19th century, it changed a lot because the Ottoman Empire disappeared, and then we have several countries with some nationalist wills. Bulgaria is independent, and then they decided everybody in Bulgaria must speak Bulgarian now. They are not isolated anymore, and they become bilingual for the first time. This is the first cutting point at the moment where they become bilingual. That's at the middle of the 19th century. And of course, we don't have any interviews with these people, but with people closely related to them, yes, we have some people. Then, after the Second World War, okay, it's not in the slide, but the Second World War was in, yeah, you have the Shoah, and many Jewish people disappeared in the other countries, not in Bulgaria, where all, I think, around 50,000 people were saved by the church. So the Orthodox Church, mainly. So we have a very strong community until the mid of the 20th century. In no other country it is similar, and they were there. 1949, it changed again. We have massive immigration waves for two reasons. First, because of the founding, the state of Israel was founded. All people were who were religious or convinced religious preferred to go to Israel and live there, and that's why many Bulgarian Jews left the country. First, because they were religious, and second, because Bulgaria was a communist country, and they didn't go so well. Only people that are not very religious and not didn't identify with this Jewish community stayed there at that time. And this was quite big, so several thousand people, but they preferred speaking Bulgarian at that point. They were the director of the National Bank and the secretary of the president, such kind of positions. Actors, singers in the opera house. So we have important people, but the acculturation was very big. So this is the third step in this process of language loss. Today, we think that there are no more than 30 people that can speak more or less correctly, more or less fluently, I mean, Judeo Spanish, and all of them are born between 1920 and 1960. So this means many of our speakers were already older than 90 when we met them. This means Bulgarian Judeo Spanish is a critically endangered language, it's a minority language. And additionally, it's not only a minority language, but it's a minority language without prestige and without any other country where this language is official. Not even in Israel. We have an Autorità del Latino in Israel, but it's not a national language. There's another situation compared to, I don't know, probably the Serbo-Croatian communities in Italy, which they have some models in Serbian Croatia to look at. We don't have this for Bulgarian Judeo Spanish. It was not a national language in any country. This is the situation. So that's why we have very special conditions for the consideration for the status of this language. It's a minority language, it's without prestige, and we have that they began speaking this with some old Spanish features at the 16th century, that everything they got from the peninsula, and then they had no relation with Spain for many years, especially from the 17th century on. They broke with Spain until the 19th century, so they had their own development. They have a long-lasting contact with Bulgarian, and especially from the 19th century, they become bilingual. And then they have nowadays a new restriction for the acquisition. They are not interested anymore in giving the language to the next generations. So what we have done in the project is to look what do we have in the current speakers? How much is still archaism? Is from the first waves from the 16th century, so more or less Old Spanish. It's not correct. Old Spanish they spoke. It's always described as Old Spanish, but it is not, of course. But it's a good label to understand. So the older features of Spanish, at least this is correct. Then we will look at Bulgarian as the contact language, and then we will compare these two generations, the ones which are really native speakers because they learned this as a child, even if they are already bilingual, and the new generation that learned this more or less like a heritage language. The language learned at home, but then in fact they are dominant in Bulgarian, and they speak only with the grandparents in Judeo Spanish. So now I come back to the three phenomena we have. It's more or less repetition of the first slide, but anyway, to understand maybe a little bit some other details. Critic climbing. So we have that the critics normally can be placed before the final verb, te lo quiere, or after the infinitive, datelo. And this is a feature which is found in Slavic, Austronesian, Greek, Romance languages, connected probably with no subject, and Judeo Spanish is still a no subject language. Old Spanish, critical climbing, we have very good studies, corpus studies by Davis, and he showed that Old Spanish really prefers critic climbing. So if you have a critic, you have to put it before the final form. Si lo quiere fazer por su mesura. And that's a quite old text in the 13th century. And you don't find examples with si quiere fazer lo por su mesura. If you are a critic, you have to raise to the first or second position. To the first position is impossible for other reasons. But you have to raise. If you are a critic, you cannot stay with infinitive. In the 13th century, it was 97% of the cases. In the 14th, 93, and then it's getting less and less. And if you look at the variation nowadays, We have also Davis compared 11 geographical regions of Spanish varieties and found, of course, some different distributions with querer, to want, is a little bit different as with other verbs like poder, can. But anyway, it is in all regions optional. And the tendency is now a preference for leaving the clitics after the infinitive, not writing it anymore. This is a change that happened independently in many varieties. So probably that had nothing to do with the contact languages in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and so on. So they have many different languages in the Americas, but something which happened in all these languages without contact with standard Spanish and independent of each other, then this is probably, this should be interpreted as an internal change. And it should be very easy to explain with, you have one movement less and use the clitic does not have to cross, come across the subordinate clause. So you have a simpler structure if you if it remains there. It could be an explanation. Clitic climbing in Bulgarian is very funny because you don't have it. Because Bulgarian does not have infinitives, you always have a complementizer. This means if you have a full flexed clause after the modal verb, the clitic is not allowed to climb to the main verb. Maybe you can have some constructions where you put a topic, left dislocated, something in this of this sort is possible, but you don't have objects from the subordinate clause climbing to the from the embedded clause climbing to the main clause. So Bulgarian does not have clitic climbing at all, and we don't find any pronominal objects that are in the main clause. So there is no possibility to have some influence from Bulgarian with respect to clitic climbing. Clitic doubling, just to recall, clitic doubling is when you have this law or this le, and then it is also in many languages: Roman, Slavic, Albanian, Greek, Semitic languages, African languages, in American languages. So it's a construction which is really quite often across languages, not so rare as it could be. The interesting thing is not only that Bulgarian is also in this list. The interesting thing is that the construction was not present in Old Spanish. So you have examples like pusieron a ellos a una par with a full pronoun, and it is really very rare that you have a full pronoun with a clitic at this period in the 13th century. We have some counter examples, yo les hice ver a ellos, and these could be, these are only examples in very specific contexts. For example, here with a causative verb. And then we find some of them, but not really very often. Only in very specific conditions, with coordinations, with causatives, but not really in standard clauses, like pusieron a ellos a una par with is, be, o, and that's all. In Bulgarian, we have the completely opposite picture. We have something that Friedman and Bryan called a multiple agreement. So you can have everything doubled. All objects, especially if they are specific, can be doubled. Then you have sentences like 5a, na momčetu davam knjigata, that's perfect. To the boy I gave book. But you can have the same with doublings. So the momčetu mu, that's the same dated, and ja davam knjigata, ja knjigata. And it's also perfect. And this is a little bit problematic because we don't really know why is this optional and if we have different interpretations. There is a very good dissertation in Cologne by Compensis, and he tried to connect clitic doubling in Bulgarian with several features, and then at the end, it must be something like saliency. But more than this, it's not possible to say more than this, saliency or emphasis or something like that.
Sorry, can you also get only one of the clitics in the doubling, like, for example, only the dative and or only the accusative? Or
That's a good question. I don't have any intuition. Okay. I should ask. I guess, yeah. Yeah, I guess it should be possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are optional.
Yeah, I think you don't need the clitic cluster. But it's not either you have clitic and then you have all of them
all of them
as a package. I think they are independent as well, the two arguments.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not quite sure. And then differential object marking. And now there is a little bit twist. That's the overt morphological marking with a subset of direct objects. Yeah, Pedro vio a la niña, Pedro vio la película. And this is also quite widespread across languages. There are more than 300 languages that make at some point a difference between objects. Not always like with this kind of preposition. It can be case distinction like in Russian or in Turkish. It could be everything, but you have a distinction. In Old Spanish, we have this only with full pronouns and proper names. Pusieron a ellos, like in the example above. It's obligatory. We find some pronouns without a, but really very few of them. Normally you have this. Bulgarian does not have them. Objects are used without prepositions. They have an article, and this article have case, and they are very proud that they have case. But what they mean case is a difference in the form of the article only in the masculine singular. The accusative can be a or at. And that's all. And T is normally not pronounced. So in my opinion, they don't have case, but yeah, they have case, and probably this is the reason that they don't have DOM at the moment. They don't use prepositions at all for direct object, but Compensis suggests in some way that they make a difference. What we make when Spanish makes a difference between objects with a preposition, Bulgarian makes the difference between objects through differential argument indexing. That is the same as critic doubling. So the pronoun is differentially marking the object. Some objects that are salient or not salient, specific or not specific. It's still not quite clear, but it seems to be a means of differentially marking arguments, critic doubling, which is a little bit different in Spanish. We are not marking arguments differentially, we are coding some features with critic doubling. If we take a closer look to this, both of them are interface phenomena. Why? Because we have features like animacy and definiteness that are relevant to explain it. If we have critic doubling or we have DOM, first we will begin with human arguments. And if we have human arguments, maybe we will also have animates. And if we have animates, we will also have inanimates. But we don't have any language with inanimate, critic doubling with inanimate or DOM with inanimate, which does not have also DOM with animates and human. And there are several proposals with different scales, but at the end, they are more or less the same. The scale in 9 is a little bit more fine-grained. So you begin with personal pronouns and with proper names. They are very highly in animacy and humanness, of course, and personal pronouns as well. Then you have definite humans, then indefinite humans, and you have specific indefinite and non-specific indefinite. And at some point, you can put this marking everywhere. And that is more or less the same for DOM and critic doubling. And that's why I don't really know if it's a good example, but you have a pronoun like eso, neuter. And with this pronoun, you cannot do anything. It's so low in these possible scales you can find. You cannot double it, lo vimos eso. It's weird, at least for me as a native speaker of Peninsular Spanish. Vimos a eso is even worse. Lo vimos a eso is, of course, not possible. So you cannot do anything if you are very low in the animacy or definitely scale or saliency scale, whatever you want. There are many studies about this, and you can apply these scales and these hierarchies both in variational studies. So the varieties you see, some varieties having different cuts in the scales and in the diachrony. So Old Spanish was only personal pronouns and proper names for dom, and now we have dom also with definite humans and indefinite humans in some ways. And the same with clitic doubling. We have Old Spanish, only a few very reduced possibilities, and now we come down to with the hierarchy. And another feature of these two constructions is what has been called case generalization, formulated by Jackley, nicely formulated by Jackley. An object NP can only be doubled when it is preceded by the preposition a. Vimos a ella is ungrammatical, la vimos ella is ungrammatical. You can only have la vimos a ella when both of them, when you have dom and clitic doubling at the same time. The explanation at that time was you have already one case, one element that provides case to the full argument. So a checks the case of ella, and then the verb has some case which is not checked by the full argument. You need a clitic additionally. So the a requires some, the requirements, the case requirements of the verbs are not fulfilled because you have a which also has given case to the full argument. And la is satisfying the verb. So the clitic is satisfying the verb. And that's why you need both. It's not quite true because these are examples from Sunier at the beginning, but also there are very good discussion at Natigo that they are not really connected. You have, of course, many cases where they come together, because if the argument is high in animacy and humanness, then the requirements for having both of them are fulfilled, but not always. And if we look at non-animate, then it is quite clear. We have la bouquet a la sonata, that's the example in Sunier, and you have both, and that's perfect. But many varieties in Argentina, and these are examples of our field works in Argentina. La pinté la casa, lo tomé el colectivo. You don't need any preposition-like element there, but you have clitic doubling. So this chain generalization is just this, a generalization, but it's not really a law that must be met.
This is obligatory.
It's not obligatory. No, it's not obligatory. That's the other thing. If we look at these hierarchies, then we see that the path is always the same. First, you don't have it, then you have optional, and then you have it. And when you have some optional, or the other way around, when you have obligatory clitic doubling in some context, then you can begin to have optional clitic doubling in the next one. And first, when you have obligatory clitic doubling with full pronouns, and this is at the end of the Middle Ages, at the beginning of the early modern Spanish or Decadenza Catalan, or it's still nowadays in the peninsular varieties of Spanish and Catalan. If it's obligatory with full pronouns, and it is now obligatory, then you can find some examples of indirect objects being doubled. In fact, some varieties have already stage 4, so indirect objects are obligatory. In Argentinian Spanish, we don't find any examples of datives without the clitic. So the clitic is always there. In Peninsular, is very often there, but not always. I allow everything. In America, it's a little bit less. And if you have this obligatory clitic doubling within the nominal object, then you can spread the use of clitic doubling to the next context, and so on until some cases in Andean Spanish where you can double everything. And it's still optional with inanimates, but you can double everything. And in this case, it could be contact language because Quechua, in this case, Alto Lima and Spanish are in contact with Quechua, and Quechua has object agreement in the verb. And maybe they are making some connection with these two structures, and that's why they are interpreting the agreement in the verb is like the clitic, which is attached to the verb. Another argument that it could be contact is that they don't have different forms for the clitic anymore. They don't use lo, la, los, las, but only lo. Like a verbal affix for object agreement is always the same affix and has not different forms.
It comes back.
And these were the results of the other research project about clitic doubling, and that's why you can already see what's about Central Spanish, and we are here more or less in stage 4, whereas Peninsular Spanish is still in stage 3. So the idea in the 19th century, the idea was Judeo Spanish is Old Spanish. It was formulated in this way. They discovered Judeo Spanish with the opening of the Ottoman Empire, maybe. They rediscovered Judeo Spanish, and they defined this as Old Spanish. It's so beautiful. But it's not everything archaism. In this case, we have some extension, which is not in Peninsular Spanish is more archaic than Judeo Spanish in this case. And that's the interesting thing. So, because we have some spread of clitic doubling to direct nominal objects, we came to these results with data which were a little bit older with text. So, not really with interviews with speakers. And the older texts were, of course, a little bit different. So, the situation nowadays differs a little bit from this cycle. And this is only to, again, to show we have what we have done for clitic doubling would be exactly the same for differential object marking in the proposal Eisen, Häusing Kaiser, and so on. So you have some features, and you will go down these hierarchies. You begin with human pronouns, and then with personal names, and then or animate pronouns, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very similar. And if we look at the development from Old Spanish to Modern Spanish, von Häusing and Kaiser showed that in Old Spanish you have only personal pronouns and proper names and some definite nouns, so optionality there. And then at some point in Modern Spanish, definite nouns must be, incorporated now the preposition, and they are still developing. So some specific indefinite NPs are also marked with R. And in some cases, also indefinite NPs that are non-specific could be marked in some cases. But this is another topic. So similar processes are found in the languages. So what I showed so long is clitic doubling is extended from full pronouns in Old Spanish to inanimate objects. And it's used with all kinds of objects in Bulgarian. So there are two different models. The question is, where is Judeo Spanish? In between, or more closer to Bulgarian, or closer to Old Spanish, or something totally different. The same for dom. It's extending from full pronouns to indefinite specific direct objects, and it's not used in Bulgarian unless you understand clitic doubling as differential object marking. And then we will get another result. But this was already spoiling. And then we have clitic climbing, which was obligatory in Old Spanish to put the clitic at the beginning of the verbal complex. But in all varieties, is developing in the same way. So independently of each other, of the contact languages, and it is not used in Bulgarian. So if we see some changes in Judeo Spanish, it cannot be contact. And if this change is the same change as in the other varieties in the Americas, and they didn't have any contact, then must be language internal. And now I come to the data. And first, these are our speakers, and then I will show you a little bit about the methods, because we are really very interested in methods, in the methodology. We divided our speakers in 3 generations, and we called them with one of the most of the nicest speakers in each of these generations. Yvette, it was Yvette Anabi. She was over 100 years old last time we met her. She was really. She died with 104, I think.
Wow.
And she was still writing books
Oh.
about Jewish women in Bulgaria, and really fascinating person. He was monolingual in Bulgarian Judeo Spanish. This means she could speak with parents, relatives in the neighborhood, Judeo Spanish with everybody. She was, of course, the best speaker of the world we had at that time, but it's not in the interviews we could have. She was already too old. Yes, she learned Bulgarian a little bit later. Then we have the second generation, Sophie. Sophie Danon was also a fascinating person. She was also 100 years old, more or less, when we last met her. She was balanced bilingual. So she learned Judeo Spanish from the parents. The parents is Yvette, for example. But this was already the time where Bulgaria was independent, so they had to learn Bulgarian as well. So they don't have a close community anymore. So balanced bilingual. And then we have the third generation, Moritz. This is the young, they are the youngest one. They are a little bit overlapping, you can see in the age range. They are bilingual, but dominant or strongly dominant Bulgarian. And this very interesting thing is they didn't speak Bulgarian to the Spanish with the parents, so with Sophie, which would be the normal thing, but with the grandparents. And the grandparents were monolingual. That's the reason why they spoke to the Spanish. Of course, if they're monolingual, I cannot speak Bulgarian with them. This means this had two effects. They have a very good input, so perfect monolingual input in childhood. So they should learn it as an L1. But the grandparents died, and they stopped speaking to the Spanish quite early. And these are most of the interviews we could make with people that spoke with the grandparents, but are dominant in Bulgarian. And for the Sophie generation, we have another set of data. So that's exactly the same thing. So monolinguals, bilinguals, and then monolingual Bulgarian with some Judeo Spanish knowledge. Input from monolingual Bulgarian Judeo Spanish speakers, the grandparents, but probably insufficient amount of time, insufficient amount of time as well. So they don't speak with the grandparents about politics, but rather the topics were rather, oh, my father is angry to me. Can you tell me what he said? And such things. So very familiar context, very within the family. And they have also this continuous exposure. In the 90s, they reactivated the language. So some of them started meeting again to recover the use of language. Club Latino was called, and they had some lessons, and they shared some songs, everything everybody knows, because the Sephardi culture is really very popular, and you can go to the concerts nowadays. And this is what they have done in the 90s in Bulgaria, especially in Sofia. The other cities are really negligible. But in Sofia, the community was relatively stable and big, and they were still really very young. They were 50 or 60 years old. They're really nothing. 30 years later, when we came, so they have now reactivation, but this reactivation, was it very successful or wasn't it? It's, yeah, I had a little bit, skeptical. So we can define it as incomplete acquirers and attributors at the same time. Incomplete acquisition, not in the sense that they don't have a complete grammar, but they don't have enough input, and then their grammars are not target-like in this sense, incomplete. Not that they don't speak, they have the whole language. They can really, they're very fluent, but they are not target-like. Like they change things afterwards when the grandparents died, for example, and they are fighters. So some things you notice they forgot some things of the grammar. For the older generation, so we took texts they wrote themselves. Paracnosolvide is like a bilingual tales they wrote or anecdotes about the family. We have a few recordings where they speak about family history and they read the North Wind and the Sun, but it's not interesting for the syntax anymore. And then we tried grammaticality judgments with them about critic distribution. So if they allow the critic in the first position or not, because it's not the topic of the talk, but in Bulgarian, first position critics are ungrammatical. In Old Spanish, they are ungrammatical. In Bulgarian Judeo Spanish, they are possible and really very common. So they have the source language and the content language, both of them have this restriction. Judeo Spanish does not have it. But this is another thing. Then critic doubling, stylistic fronting, so some information structure interfaces we tested. We had many problems with this because they accepted absolutely everything. They didn't understand the text. They thought, yeah, if you want, do it. It's not standardized. Everybody can speak as you want. And then it was really very difficult to get judgment. What they corrected is, the word is not trabajar, it's laborar. And they discussed this for hours, but not about the grammaticality of the sentences. So we decided in the next phase of the project, also in the next field work, to do it in another way. And then we have a mix of elicitation tasks and reproduction tasks. And we had interviews in November 22 and September 23 in different cities for testing of this all the phenomena and also for testing phonology. The interesting thing in the cards, picture naming text, most of them are phonetic features, intonation, and things that are not relevant now. What we used for this talk is the pre-production, so spontaneous speech, and semi-directed interviews. The difference is semi-directed interviews, they had to speak about certain topics, and the questions were the same for all of them. And spontaneous speech is when they spontaneously say, oh, I remember something, I want to tell you something. And they spoke about anything they wanted. And maybe there are differences in both productions. And then we tried to elicitate the constructions through translations. So we forced them to produce constructions that are ungrammatical, to look if they do it or if they correct it. Not if they evaluate it. They evaluate everything is correct, but if they have to produce it, they have had trouble. And the result was we tried to find all constructions that were parallel word by word in Bulgarian Judeo Spanish. So we put a sentence in Bulgarian with critic doubling, and then we tried to, please translate it. And they were really at the limit of the cognitive possibilities. This means they tried to do it word by word, always. And if you have a critic dubbing here, you put a critic dubbing there. And we have many constructions that are probably very marginal, and they produce it. Not in the spontaneous speech, because they have only SVO and very simple constructions, but in the translations, yes. And then we have constructions where many speakers, most of them, didn't manage to make the translation, even if their strategy was word by word. And they stopped translating and said, no, I can't. And they translated with SVO sentences. This was especially for stylistic context. They couldn't translate it word by word. And then they translated with that verb, put in another way, changing the word order. And this shows us stylistic fronting is accepted in the grammaticality judgments, but if they have to translate it, they are not able to do it. So, and this probably in this Moritz generation, the case, not in the other generations, or so maybe they had this construction and nowadays they don't. So because I don't have so much time, so here are the results. First, some general observation. They have problems with lexical retrieval. They have problems with the exact morphology. This does not mean that they don't have the features imperfect or perfect, but they don't know how to conjugate the verbs. So it's something different. They know everything, but sometimes the word or the exact form of the morpheme is not here. They have lots of code switching, and code mixing, but that's not really contact. They are just mixing languages and they don't care. And of course, they have lower fluency because the language is not activated. And what we find is inter-speaker variation a lot. And idiosyncratic fantastic. Every speaker is a little bit different. This is an overview of all features we have investigated. For example, aspect, the periphrasis, the continuous periphrasis was really very interesting because being in contact with a Slavic language, they were totally confused. I would have expected that they don't have problems because they have much more input about the distinction, spectral distinctions. I think make a redistribution of the features, which is very interesting. And then these other features. But then I will now show these three constructions, what is in the generation Sophie and what is in the generation Moritz. And in the texts and in the older recordings by Sophie, we have that clitic doubling is used like Iberian Peninsular in many cases, rogarle a mi hermano, lo querían a Salomón que se venga, or le demandé a una amiga. So we have lots of clitic doubling in contexts where it is also possible in Iberian Spanish, and we have also clitic doubling in, yeah, a little bit more in, but not really different from Iberian Spanish. In the next generation, Moritz, it also occurs with definitives. It's obligatory with full pronouns and with experience dative, but not with the others. It's always optional, very similar to Bulgarian. And we have examples like me hablaba francés a mí, and this is from a speaker who normally doesn't like using the critics, but if it's a pronoun, he uses it, or a mí me placen majos viejos. If it's a sight verb, they use it, even if they don't like using it. Or we have many examples with human or animates, los trae los críos para que los vean. But we have also examples with inanimates, like la cantaban la frase. And you can also see already in these sentences that the Keynes generalization does not apply. And for differential object matching, we have optionality with animate and inanimates in the older generation Sophie. Conocía a Vicky Taller como mujer de un cercano mío, o busqué mucho a estas personas. But at the same time, we have sentences like me alegrí de ver mis primos. It should be a mis primos Peninsular Spanish because it's animate and definite, or empecé a buscar mi madre, buscar a esas personas, buscar mi madre. In these generations, you have optionality in all these contexts. So DOM is not so far changed, has not changed so far as Peninsular Spanish. Or the same with non-animal. Yo les di a todos a un libro. Probably this has something to do with the distributivity. I don't know, but we have another example a little bit older. That's not from our corpus, but anyway, y besó a mis manos. And a little bit later in the same text, and really very close, y besó mis manos. Once with and once without so. So it's totally optional with animates, with inanimates. That's the older generation. It's not the same as Old Spanish, it's not the same as Modern Spanish. It's of course not the same as Bulgarian. Moritz has another distribution. It's optional, but we only have examples with animate. Llamó a la vecina, o yo creo a la babá, so que conoceva a unos ladinos que hablaban ladino. And we have many such examples with and without. And the positive thing, we have these examples with the translation. So we have exactly the same sentence with many speakers. With these 20 speakers, we have more or less the same example, llamó a la vecina, for everybody, and some of them have it, some of them don't have it. Some of them correct it and correct the sentence because another mistakes, and then they put it or they remove it. So it's optional. But only with animates. We don't have with inanimates. And these are a couple of examples without them. Conoce unos hablantes ladino, que hablan, I can't remember the next continuation. Ahora no tengo ninguno, no tengo otros de la familia no tenemos. No conozco Kalina with a proper name, and it's optional. That's the Moritz generation. Critic doubling seems to be independent of DOM, so the generalization does not apply, and that's important later on. La llamó a la vecina, o León la llamó a la vecina. We found both. Lo pisó al pobre hombre, la quería Sophie para arrestarla. So with and without DOM, critic doubling, and in the other way around. And third, critic climbing, and here the picture is much easier, because we don't have any differences with other varieties of Spanish. So we have me podía lavar, and it's before the final verb, or no puedes pagarle, and that's after the infinitive. We have lo quiero decir, before the finite form, or no querían decirme, after the infinitive. So we have exactly the same distribution as in all other varieties. And this is a phenomenon which does not have anything with contact. And in the younger generation, we have exactly the same. Podían reírse, puede tornarse, with infinitive, or se puede pesar, te quiero contar, le quiero escribir, with the clitic before the final form. So clitic climbing is not a problem, although the clitics work very differently. So what we see is no difference within clitic climbing. It's narrow syntax, so they should learn it perfectly and very quickly. And we don't expect residual optionality or differences or instability, but we have instability with clitic doubling and DOM. Clitic doubling is not yet generalized in P2 by Sophie, and the use of DOM seems very common. And then the next generation generalizes clitic doubling and reduces DOM, more or less, very roughly. How can we explain this? And then I come to a short discussion if I have a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So that's just summing up. We have the fourth stage of clitic doubling and an acceleration, probably to contact effects. We have contact varieties very often have an acceleration of a language internal development. And then we have that DOM is very robust, but the maintenance is of a construct. They maintain DOM because they don't have any interference of the content. It was with second generation. That is exactly the same. I can skip it a little bit. And the third generation reduces DOM, but interestingly, they reduce DOM and maintain this only with animates. And according to some acquisitional studies, like Farodi and Abraham, these semantic features are applied very early. The features in themselves, children are aware of animacy very early, earlier than definiteness or specificity. So these features are already in their competence. They learn the construction, and this construction is very robust, but only with the features that are learned at this point. These cross-relevant features for DOM are not active in that moment, are not incorporated in the constructions, and then these constructions does not observe the construction. It sounds very plausible because we have this interrupted acquisition. The picture is a little bit different for clitic doubling. Moritz have obligatory clitic doubling for full pronouns and experience adjectives, and these are the contexts where clitic doubling first occurred in the languages Torrens and Beck analyzed. These are the first contexts where clitic doubling occurs, and these contexts are very robust. They have enough evidence, and they do it. They learned it from the generation before. But they also expand this to inanimate, and this is an overgeneralization we didn't expect. What is a possible explanation? And for explaining why they explained, and we looked at the contact language, of course, but before looking at the contact language, I looked at every speaker, this inter-speaker variation. Is the whole group consistent, or is each grammar of each speaker a little bit different? With DOM, it's a little bit different, difficult, because these are phonologically it's not really always there. If you have another vowel in contact, then it is really difficult to decide if they use DOM or not. That's why you have many question marks with DOM. Some of them don't use any context in the spontaneous speech where you can require DOM or clitic doubling, and that's why you have a minus. For the other speakers, you see they use either clitic doubling, 1, 2, and 3, or DOM, but not both. We don't have any speakers that use both. And our idea was, what they are doing is borrowing the functional load of a construction of the contact language, not the construction themselves of clitic doubling is borrowed. They have the construction, but they are reassembling the features they had for clitic doubling and reinterpreting, putting the features of the contact language in the constructions they know. Some of them interpreted this as clitic doubling, and they said, clitic doubling, this is my construction, and they lose the features of the Spanish construction and put the features of the Bulgarian construction, like a substitution, more or less. The others are a little bit cleverer, maybe, and they identified it's a differential object marking. Clitic doubling is something else, and they put differential object marking as a reflex of the functional feature they had in the contact language. And in this case, we have the effect that if you have some narrow syntax features, you will follow your grammaticalization path and your spontaneous contact internal path. If you have interface phenomenon, then some things will happen. And this is also connected. The outcomes are also connected with the acquisitional path of the features you are learned. The features that are learned earlier are stable and will not be so problematic than the features that are learned afterwards. And this is what I just said. So the natural language change for these ones. And if you have contact, if you have an interface phenomenon, you have to look also how was the transmission of the language. And I can skip it because it's repetition. I say just thank you, and yeah, thank you.
Well, I think we can start the discussion, and I would start with people online as usual if there are questions. Otherwise, we can ask questions from the room, but I'm asking before. Okay. Patrizia Cordin.
Hi, thank you. It was very, very interesting. I have two marginal comments. One is about the exceptions to Keynes' generalizations, and I think you can find many other exceptions. You show that there are in your the languages that you speak about, but also in our dialects, you can find some generalizations. For instance, you can find something like el, ma, me, tu, mi, a, blah, 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 blah. Two pronouns, clitic and full pronoun, for the first person and for the second person, not for the third one. So this first comment is connected to a second one, which is a question to you. Do you think that it is possible to find a scale even inside the personal pronouns? I mean, first and second persons are in a certain sense higher than third pronoun, since the first and second persons are always human, but third person can be human and not human. So,
Yeah.
okay, just a question.
You're totally right. We also tried to put it in Old Spanish and to find the data in Old Spanish. Our problem was that third person in Spanish is only for non-animates. I cannot.
I see.
How was it? La vi, ella. It can only be a person.
Okay.
We don't have inanimates as a third person pronoun. Full pronoun.
Okay, I think maybe in general, if you think about the languages who have DOM, maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe that some data go towards a hypothesis that the first and second persons are higher than the other persons.
I would expect it.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay.
And in fact, also the same with prose-draw, which first person and third person work a little bit differently. Yeah, of course. But our data are not there. In Spanish, it's not possible.
And then another comment. It seemed very convincing, the interface hypothesis applied to your languages. And I'm asking if it's strengthened by the fact that in Old Spanish, the situation for clitic climbing was very clear. Yes? Much more clearer than for the other two phenomena, where you have distinctions. And the same for Bulgarian. Clitic climbing is very clear, no clitic climbing. So I think it's connected to what you propose. I mean that the clear situation is connected to the interface hypothesis, but I think that it's something to consider, the origin, the clear origin and the clear distinction between Old Spanish and Bulgarian, which regards only clitic climbing and not the other two phenomena.
Yeah. What do you mean with clear?
If I have understood well, in Old Spanish, clitic climbing was okay, 90% or more, okay?
Yes.
So clitic climbing was the normal, the default result, okay?
Yes.
No particularity, but which are connected to the interface hypothesis. But it's very clear. Yes, it was the normal situation. In Bulgarian, normal situation, no clitic climbing. So it's very, you have two distinct and very easy situations to understand yes, no. In the other cases, the situations are much more confused.
And probably there is another factor which we cannot control for, that we have only written text. And we are not quite sure if the situation was really like this.
Right.
So probably
Okay,
the
right.
change was already ongoing.
Okay.
The picture is really very clear, but it's
Okay.
probably because you cannot put the clitic there because that's like the poor people speak, and that's probably what we have in written text is not really a good
Yeah, right.
good description of our anyway. Nowadays we don't have it's clear in the sense that we don't have any interpretation of the clitics. We can put it there or there, and it's not a difference, and that's always perfect. And you don't have to think about anything. Just put it, and then you put it in the place where it is easier to put. With clitic doubling, it's not so easy because you have some more connection, and then you have to make decisions in some way.
Yes.
And probably, I guess you have much more clitic doubling already in the 15th century when the Jews were expelled. And that's why we also have clitic doubling and one in the other varieties. But that's something we cannot control for. We don't have so much spontaneous text.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. A couple of questions. One is about DOM, and I read some interesting works on DOM a few years ago that hypothesized the role of information structure in DOM. And I'm thinking about a work I read by Dalrymple and Nikolaeva. They hypothesized that historically speaking, these features of animacy, specificity, etc., are indicators of topicality, so that you would originally have some like topical objects or non-topical objects to be marked. So I wonder whether information structure here, historically speaking, if you think it may play a role. That's the first question. And second question is, I very much like your use of the interface hypothesis in this context. As far as I know about the interface hypothesis, in Soracio's work, there's this distinction between different types of interfaces, drawing on White's idea of interfaces and back to Chomsky's model, okay, so between internal and external interfaces. And as far as I understand it, Soracio postulates that the harder interfaces to be processed in L2 acquisition are the external ones, so the ones between syntax and pragmatics typically. And it seems to me that your interface phenomena are clearly very clear examples of interface phenomena, but most often they require an interface between syntactic and semantic features like animacy, specificity, etc. So I wonder whether, if pragmatics were involved and information structure were involved, whether you would expect a higher degree of uncertainty or instability. Because that would be that would add something to the framework as well. I think so. These are my two questions.
You are totally right. Thank you. With information structure and DOM, how do you want to test it? That's our problem. So we tried to look at the old text, but then it is really very difficult to decide. What is topical, what is not topical. If the speaker understood these as topical or not topical, and then we, not even specificity, we were not able to have a definition for specificity, which is applicable to the text. Because whatever you want, specificity is a wide scope. Wide scope. Good, but in the text, you don't have wide scope always, or you don't have the particles to show that it's this wide scope in this example. So you have your sentences and you cannot code them. And that's why we let this information structure a little bit aside. Probably it is true. That's the same for clitic doubling. All these hierarchies at the end are connected with topicality or with not saliency. How did we call this? With prominence in some way.
Prominence.
And that's why the most prominent thing is me. and then you, and then what is a human like we are, and probably that's what the path is motivated. So
Yeah.
I guess you are right, but I wouldn't know how to prove it.
Yeah, of course.
With empirical data.
That's always, well, almost always the case when you work with information structure, right? It's hard, to when you look, especially when you look at text. So there's always this personal component of interpretation of the information structure role of the constituents you're looking at. So you want to rule out that it's too much of your, of your impression.
And then you asked about internal external interfaces, and then this would be the topic of another talk, which we had already about focus construction. And this was a topic we had, a work we had together with the phonologists. Okay. They had some stimuli, and where the participants had to focus on particular items. And so we were more or less sure that they are trying to put the information structure in the way we want it. If it works, by some of them it works quite good, but the others not so good. And then you have many, then you can see many things about these external interfaces. And what we observed is that the constructions were much closer to Bulgarian than to Spanish at this point. They have more variability, and they have other strategies. So that's true. What we wanted here is, we were not interested in separated internal and external interfaces at this point, because it's not so explicit maybe in the talk, but the idea behind this was, if we connect the interface hypothesis with language acquisition, and this is our work, I think Kupic and Rothman and these people, they have some, they made the connection. What is learned first is normally not at interfaces, and what is interfaces is learned later on. And if we put this in the framework of with Larissa Abram, and then we saw at the first, you learn the features that are in the VP, that in the TP, that in the CP. And the CP would be the last one you learn. It's also the original framework, not from Sorace it's herself, but Krista Platzak, who also said the CP is the place where you have the optionality and change.
Yes, of course.
And then
tactically, yes.
Yes, and yes, and we put this syntactically, and that's why in some way it is irrelevant if it is internal or external. It is something you build on, and then the first things you learn, they are very stable, and the things you learn later are not stable anymore. And it's even independent if it's an interface or not. At the end, this would be irrelevant if it's an interface or not. Probably it will be an interface because narrow syntax is earlier. That was our idea. In this phenomenon, maybe it works more or less well, but we have also other phenomena where we didn't manage to put this in this framework. So something is going wrong, for example, adjectives. The placement of adjectives, if they are pre-nominal or post-nominal, we had lots of problem putting the, making a connection between interfaces or acquisition path, because they are learned early. They are not really problematic because most of them are not really interfaces. If they are interfaces, they are very semantic, they conditionant, but they are doing them wrong in many cases. The generation before put the adjectives almost always post-nominal. The younger speakers put them pre-nominal, as in Bulgarian, where pre-nominal is obligatory. And then we have some problems explaining this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the picture is.
Yeah.
intricate.
But
Yeah.
at the end, it was also the objective of the project. If we only look at one phenomenon, then we will have a theory which is very good for this phenomenon. And in the project, we wanted to look at many phenomena
Yeah,
to explain
sure.
everything,
Makes
and
sense.
with possibly only one theory which is explaining everything. And then we have problems because it fits not so well for every single phenomenon. And that's what we want to we will continue with other things, word order, subject, and a little bit more, and other contact languages. We already talked about at the beginning, before the beginning.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or?
Couple of comments or questions. So it was a great talk. Thank you so much. It was really inspiring from many points of view. But just a first idea. So first question: why is the critic doubling developing downwards now in Spanish? Why can we see that Old Spanish had clitic doubling, but now it's developing more downwards, and the clitics are in the VP or the so with the infinitive verb.
A climbing.
Climbing.
Yeah. They're not
Climbing.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, my feeling is that Italian is developing the other way. So that we are putting the clitics on the top of the verb and not in the infinitive, because there are many dialects in which the clitic doubling is banned. It's not possible.
Yes.
And this seems to be, to me, very residual of the previous stage. So I don't really get the idea that the diachronic path is developing against the climbing of the clitic. Which kind of changes are there in Spanish in order to explain that?
That's a good question.
Because, I mean, was maybe you said that there is probably a connection between pro-drop and clitic climbing. So, but as far as I know, Old Spanish was a pro-drop.
Was already pro-drop.
So
Exactly.
it was already pro-drop.
Yeah, and that's why we have this position, free position there. This is in the literature. That's not not really my opinion.
You're right. I'm asking you just
exactly
not because it's connected.
How was it in the Italian variety? Was it possible to?
In Old Italian, I don't know.
Okay.
Don't actually know.
But I think Old French was also in this direction. Old French, you have clitic climbing in Old French. If I'm not wrong, but I think I saw it a couple of weeks ago. Some examples, they have clitic climbing. Today, it's only possible with some specific, with a causative, and otherwise you don't have it. I would guess that the connection is with the tabla musafia position. Because in Old Spanish, you have the clitics in the second position, or at least you don't have it in the first position. But at some point, we have it in the second position. This means the clitic must follow the first element in the sentence. And this is irrelevant if you have where the clitic comes from. So you put it in the second position, and then the next position is a verb. In some way, if you have pro-drop, the next position will be the verb in many cases. Okay. This would be an explanation, maybe. We don't have the tabla musafia anymore. Okay. So the clitic is now a verb adjacent, but it's not anymore enclitic to the first position. And then you have the possibility of not moving. And the other factor could be related to the monocausality or weak bicausality of the auxiliaries or the modals. of they are monoclausal or biclausal, and then there are these studies about if you have to decline it because the verb is only in one head and it's monoclausal. But that's like a little bit circular. If it's monoclausal, the clitic is here. If it's biclausal, the clitic is there. Okay, and there are not further arguments why it is mono or biclausal. So maybe the explanation should be the other way around. But I don't really know.
Well, it's not relevant, of course.
Yeah, okay, that's true, but
it was more a question because Latin didn't have clitics, of course, and I presume that the first stage of the Romance languages was without clitics, only with full pronouns, and then clitics started to develop. Okay, so the ideal position is in the VP because you have the argument in the VP, and then when clitics started to develop, then they started to move to a high position, maybe. And then, but now, why is Spanish developing? Okay, but it's not the question of Judeo Spanish.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry about insisting.
Had nothing to do with Latin, that's true.
Yeah.
But also the Latin pronouns, they are full pronouns. That means you can put it at the beginning of the sentence if they are focalized. So they have a lot of freedom. You have the verb at the end of the clause, and then the pronouns are at some point, at the beginning of the clause. Somewhere in this place, and clitics are giving information. Pronouns are giving information. So again, to the information structure.
Maybe also text type could be another path to go, because if you just look at the written, more formal text, it may be the case that a preferred option in that case would be clitic climbing, whereas you would find maybe, I don't know, but I mean, depends on how much data you have in that regard, but it may be the case that in other types of production, you would still find some evidence without the clitic climbing, but you just don't see it because you have only a portion of the language in a certain context, right?
Yeah, so. And this was also there was an attempt to explain the positions with subjectivization or something like this. So if it's a more emotive or less emotive, then you have in this position, and if it's a neutral, you have this in the other position. But then the empirical basis is not there, because grammatically the judgments nobody cares. So I don't have any intuitions, and probably I use it correctly, or maybe it's true with this feature. But I don't have any intuitions. So how can I answer a grammaticality judgment or acceptability judgment? It was really like,
But still, the Judeo-Spanish seems to conserve the previous state, to have the previous stage of Spanish with respect to the climbing of the clitic, because
not really, not both. It's already both.
Both,
yeah.
But today in Spanish, it's
preferred,
but it's both.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
But it's preferred. Okay, I see.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Prefer. For me, it's both.
It's both.
Both possible.
Yeah.
Lo
quiero ver, quiero verlo.
It's exactly the same, but I think there are statistical, corpus data show that they are more often.
Yeah, Italian is the same, but not in the Italian dialect. There are some differences.
Yeah, but that's not fair. Italian dialect is always like
it's
and you can have everything there. It's so so fascinating. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Otherwise, I thank you again for being here for the very interesting talk. It was amazing. Thank you. And I let Paolo do the announcement.
All right. So next week's Conversazioni Linguistiche will not be taking place. However, you're all invited to the presentation of the book Noam Chomsky, un intellettuale tra linguistica e politica, in which the author, in dialogue with 3 other speakers, Patrizia Cordin of the Department of Humanities, Eugenio Parise of the Department of Cognitive Science, and Tiziana Faitini of the Department of Humanities will be discussing the figure of Noam Chomsky. The event will take place on the 27th of October, which is a Monday, at 5 p.m. In the Department of Humanities in room 4. All right, so until then, see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.